venerate, we must to a degree understand. We cannot truly venerate that which is incomprehensible. Therefore, to recognize universal good, we must have some of goodness in ourselves. If we would recognize universal truth, we must have some of truthfulness in ourselves. Finding in the infinite the fulfillment and fullness of all virtues which we practice in part. But in time that which is in part shall pass away, and we shall know all things in fullness and in truth. So the Pythagorean verses go on to indicate the future state of these beings which have emancipated themselves. And of course, following the old Greek and also the Egyptian method, the philosophy ties into the mystery of death, because death now becomes symbolic. Every time we forget the old, we die and are born into the new. The individual who gives up a grudge dies to be born a better person. For always death is the giving up of the old, and birth is the attainment of the new. Therefore, every day that we grow, an old self dies, and a new self is born. Bondage lies in continuing in the same self, without freedom. If we never outgrow what we have been, we are bound to it forever. And this is inconceivable and impossible. Therefore, we are forever being reborn. And we are forever dying out of a lessness. And with every new experience, which is like the addition of a molecule or an electron to a formula, a totally new being comes into existence. Therefore, St. Paul says, I die daily. And out of this constant death of the old, and the rebirth of the new, man is moving forward in consciousness. Every disillusionment, discouragement, despair, criticism, and condemnation is another death. Every discovery of good is a new birth. Every hope that springs within us is a new birth in time. A birth of a new being dedicated to new purposes and new principles. There is an old self in each of us that must perish, and a new self in each of us that must be liberated into manifestation. And this new self is a messianic self, a self which has within it the healing of all the old problems that burdened us. Every time we become bigger than a problem, we are reborn. Because we have attained freedom, we are in slavery to ignorance, but we are free men in the light of truth and of wisdom and of understanding. So in the death situation or symbolism comes the idea that through the death of the old, through the death of the lower being, man is liberated into the higher regions of true being. And the Pythagorean verses go on to point out that man, having attained the philosophic death and the philosophic rebirth, the old self having died by discipline, the new self having been born by inspiration and aspiration, but this new being now transforms itself from a creature of the earth to a creature of heaven. It is like this fable of Cupid and Psyche. It is like the butterfly symbol which the Greeks used for the soul. The mortal being a caterpillar crawling upon the earth, then entering discipline or into a state of internal integration by building the cocoon, and finally bursting forth as a winged creature flying into the light. These are the states of man's soul, and it is the purpose of the golden verses to bring man to this radiant power of flight, to give him the wings of intuition and reason, that he may ascend out of the darkness of the underworld straight to the light of truth. And these are not the wings of false learning fastened on by wax, which will melt off when we get too near the sun. These are our natural wings, hidden within ourselves, not put upon us from without, and these natural wings will sustain us, for we contain within our own nature this power of flight, this power of motion directly to the source of things. And it is so moved toward the source that man attains the end of the Pythagorean life. So the golden verses declare that at the end of man's search for reality, he shall himself truly become as the gods, knowing good and evil. He shall attain to communion with the eternal powers at the root of life. He shall join with them and serve with them. He shall be their instrument, and they shall live through him. And through his own growth, man keeps the faith with the gods and releases them. For a God is born every time the God in man is born. And all good things coming into birth through man bear witness to the eternal will of the everlasting good. Man, becoming a servant of good, becomes one with the gods. And having attained this, according to the Pythagorean verses, he enters into a state of felicity. He then comes no longer into the sorrow and darkness of the unknown, but he goes forth serving good as gloriously and as fully as he has previously served ignorance. Now, if we look upon man at his present state and see how he wanders on year after year, generation after generation, age after age, performing these same mistaken things, which have mutilated and distorted history since the beginning, we find that man has an almost inconceivable capacity to continue, to do things as they have been done, to continue the processes which have become natural and familiar to him. If therefore this man becomes enlightened, if he truly becomes one with the divine power, he may then subsist continuously in this, finding a way of life as glorious, as happy, and as extensive as his more miserable existence is today. He will find then that all institutions which are necessary for his good will flourish, that his life and his world will be enriched, that peace will come to him, that the great enemies, sin and death, will disappear. If not literally, their power over him will vanish. For it is not death, but the fear of death that slaves men to mortality. All things not good vanish away in the light of good. And it is perfectly possible and perfectly conceivable for men to live as well as they now live badly. That only, however, through the attainment of that which is true and necessary can this be done. Discrimination then gives man this picture of well-being, of rightness, of suitableness in all things, and reminds him that he is human, that of all creatures that he knows, he has been most internally gifted with understanding, with insight, with skill, with faculties and powers, with memory and imagination, with sense and intuition, that he may accomplish all these things. That these wonderful faculties should be bound utterly to a narrow circle of materialistic activities is naturally unreasonable. Man with a tenth of the faculties could maintain himself as efficiently as the ant, whose culture and civilization, from a practical standpoint, is far greater than ours. But man has other purposes. He has other reasons for existence, and that he should have these powers and not recognize that they are invitations to growth seems incredible. That man should be able to look around him and see that he is greater than the animal, and yet have no desire to excel that animal in essential matter, is amazing and almost beyond conception. That we should see the great achievement of a few, that we should contemplate the wonderful attainments of those honored and venerated persons whom we regard as sanctified, and yet have no general impulse to emulate them, not to recognize that within ourselves is an open door leading to universal integration, not to see this in the presence of the power to see it, means that we have long been chained and held to false opinions. The Pythagoreans 2,600 years ago sought to bring these facts to man, that man, being obviously the noblest creature that we can perceive, must also have the noblest destiny, and that this destiny cannot be fulfilled in war and pillage and competition and strife, that these things do not lead to the end for which man is intended. They do not bring him into living communion with the gods. They do not restore him to his eternal estate. They do not liberate him from sin, ignorance, and fear. These things must be attained from within. A man endowed with the power to attain will attain if he makes the sincere and natural effort. But against this effort is the constant inertia, bounded by this eternal feeling that we can't do this and we can't do that. We simply lack this tremendous drive. Nature bestows impetus by giving us problems and showing us that we must either solve or be miserable. And in this emergency, with all our faculties and all our powers, man decides to be miserable. He still rejects solution, because this solution takes effort. And our civilization has gradually decreased our desire to use our resources for a purpose relating to our inner lives. Yet without this resource, so applied, our outer lives will never be solved. So the golden verses point to this future state in which man, joining with the gods in the infinite empyrean, lives forever in beatitude, not necessarily actually meaning that he's going off into the sky and stay there, but meaning that he has found heaven within himself, that when he turns inward, he turns upon the countenance of the divine being, that when he is quiet, out of the hidden springs and fountains of his own soul flow waters of life instead of the polluted streams of his own perversions, that he can sit down and be at peace, that he can dream and hope, that his faith is stronger than any doubt, and that in all decision he decides with the gods. And having made this decision, he finds that in all things the divine power is with him. This being with the gods, being true to the rule, having the courage and insight and love to dedicate our powers and skills to that which is the greater good, this decision, this insight, brings with it the consolation of spirit that surpasseth understanding. In that time and under those conditions, all these dark things will pass away. We shall no longer see through a glass darkly, but face to face. And we shall also discover that in this seeing face to face, life becomes very simple, that philosophy becomes very simple, and that out of all learning comes only the strength to do that which is simple, to do those things which are true, and then to live quietly in the constant light of the presence of truth. To make this attainment is our natural end and our natural birthright. And into the golden verses, therefore, have been incorporated what seems to me to be the essence, the substance of the noblest thoughts of man. No great religion can deny these truths. It may attempt to develop them or specialize them, but still the principle remains that man, through the reformation and rededication of his life, through the offering of himself totally and without reservation to the service of truth and upon the altar of good, by these dedications and these consecrations, man justifies the good life, justifies the presence of the gods, and that which he earns he shall have, and that which he serves shall come to him, and that which is his duty shall be shown to him, and he shall dwell in peace with the gods through all eternity.